All right, thanks for coming out, everybody, and checking this out. I just wanted to real quickly talk about one of my favorite parts of our new book, myself and Derek Brose, who's going to be speaking next. It's called The Conscious Resistance, Reflections on Anarchy and Spirituality. It is a collection of histories. It is a collection of histories of different spiritual traditions and cultural traditions throughout the world. I'm just going to talk about the specific part of it that I came here to speak about today, and that is Zomia. I'm not sure if anybody is familiar with Zomia, but it is a name for a geographical space in western-ish, which now is known as China, and it was an area of land that was larger than Europe, and it wasn't touched by a state up until less than 100 years ago. And most of the people that lived there were a collection of different types of cultures that believed in different things spiritually. They had different concepts of law, but they traded together, and they all lived together in this mountainous region known as Zomia. It didn't really have a name until probably like 20, 30 years ago, when this archaeologist came across basically the fact that the state did not touch this area. And when we're taught the history of our world in public school and stuff like that, it is basically a world of all these lines on a map, and these people have control of these territories. But that actually really wasn't possible until the past 100 years. So prior to that, there were all these areas of land that may have had a line around it on a map in some book somewhere, but the state was not able to really get out there and control those people's lives so much. Now with technology, it's completely different, and the whole world is that map. But prior to that, it really wasn't. And I think that our whole view of history is totally skewed to think that there were these empires, when in reality, the walls only stretched so far. And those walls did not stretch as far in reality as they did on the map. So kind of going back to that, I think that with technology as a barrier today, it is going to be much harder to return to that kind of lifestyle, of course. But, coming from where we're coming from, trying to convince people that a stateless society is possible, one of the things that people always point to as a problem of why we can't have freedom is that, it hasn't happened anywhere. You can't point to a realistic example of when there was anarchy, and really it was most of the world until like 100 years ago. Even though they had their lines drawn on the maps, and even though sometimes they did stretch out into the countryside and into the mountains and rob people periodically, they were really nothing but a band of thieves up there anyway, like they are in reality, but it was just more accepted within the walls of their cities. And that area that they controlled grew over time. And Zomia is a perfect example of where people could get along even though they were not under the same organized structure of belief or law or spirituality or anything like that. And one point that we bring up in the book is that a couple hundred years ago, most places in the earth, you would not really think that people could live next door to each other and have a different concept of spirituality or, afterlife or anything that happens beyond the five senses. If you lived in a specific area, you were expected to abide by those specific beliefs. And now people understand that that is completely crazy. And I think that the farther that we take that, we really don't even need to be under the same set of laws. Even people who may even go to the obvious extreme of saying, let's have defense agencies protect people, that's perfectly fine. But those defense agencies don't even need to operate in the same geographical area. In other words, you would not necessarily need to subscribe to the same defense agency that your neighbor did. And you could have a different set of laws as long as you had a simple basis of non-aggression. And whatever else you believed, you agreed that you did not have the right to infringe upon others' rights, on each other's property, and, things of that nature. So I think that it's really important to go back to Zomia, especially when people try to throw it at us that, there's never been this example of freedom. It's just been the way we've been taught. History tells us that that's the way it's been. When in reality, there was all this life and activity and trade going on outside of the realistic boundaries of the empire that weren't even touched. And we can see in an area like this, we have a pretty good amount of freedom here because we're kind of, even with technology, beyond the stretches of the state in a lot of ways. And that is how most of the world was until not too long ago. And I think that is just extremely important to stress and bring up in debates like that. And returning to the book a little bit, just to give you guys kind of a background, because Derek's going to be overarching as a whole and not like kind of an overview of freedom in that perspective. So we kicked back a bunch of ideas and we realized that it's not like one idea that everybody needs to believe in. It's just the fact that everybody has the right to have their own ideas. And there is a lot of atheism, which is cool, and that is their perspective about what exists beyond the five senses. So in the book, we define spirituality as any belief that people have about what exists beyond the five senses. So if you believe that nothing exists, then that's your belief. If you have a belief of some kind of scientific nature or metaphysical nature, or you go back to certain myths or legends, or you combine all that stuff, each person kind of has the right to develop their own path in that way. And these organizations that have developed these teachings and told people what to believe have taken their right away to kind of form their own opinion about it. And we don't say one way or the other. Personally, as you would know when you get through the book, we're definitely coming from a spiritual perspective and not an atheist perspective. But we do think that fits in with the idea of having a free spirituality, and that is just the path that they choose in theirs. Just even now, there is a tendency for people to want to try to save the world by forcing other people into their mentality because they know that their mentality is correct. And even in our situation, even though our mentality is correct and we all know it, we also know that we don't have the right to force it on other people. So it's kind of an interesting dilemma. But I think it really is in some situations, as long as people aren't straight up hurting people or delegating the hurting of people, then we gotta agree to disagree in some situations. And when it comes to the realm of spirituality, a lot of this is stuff that is beyond the five senses, stuff that we can't prove. So the fact that we're having wars, we're killing each other, we're disowning family members over things that can't be proven is really, really crazy and sad. And so the position that we kind of game to as what we would advocate or what we would call our spirituality if we were asked, even though we hate putting words to this, would be explorative agnosticism. And that is, we don't know what's going on, we don't know what's going to happen, but we respect all viewpoints about what may happen beyond the five senses, what may lead beyond, and we take that all into our own personal perspective of it. And we can discuss that with others without having any kind of hostility, because that doesn't need to be right or wrong. Looking at that in a right or wrong perspective is really losing track of what philosophy is all about and what figuring that whole thing is all about. So that's really all I wanted to say, and Derek will be next. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you.